Hello and welcome to episode number 3 of the KMO Show. I'm your host, KMO, and this episode, which is prepared for release onto the World Wide Web on Wednesday, March 15th, 2003, the Ides of March, beware, features a conversation with my old friend and podcasting peer, Doug Lane. I don't remember exactly when I first started to hear from Doug Lane, but it didn't take long before we were talking over, at the time, Skype. Remember Skype? And appearing as guests on one another's podcasts. I've stayed at his house. We met up in New York City for the Left Forum one year. I remember we were sitting in the exhibitors area and just recording a conversation between the two of us, and somebody walked by and said, "Oh, it's my two favorite podcasters." I wish I knew who that was. Anyway, that incident was probably over 10 years ago, and I remember Doug and I just sitting in a bar, drinking, talking about how old we were back then. So it is a perennially favorite topic because, well, you know, the older you get, as the They Might Be Giant song says, you're older than you've ever been, and now you're even older. And now you're even older. And now you're even older. You're older than you've ever been, and now you're older still. Unlike podcasters, the topic never gets old. Anyway, here is the first part of my most recent conversation with Doug Lane.
Here we are.
Your browser has lost connection to your camera. Yeah, so it goes. All right. We are recording, and this is a podcast.
Welcome to the C Realm. Oh, no, it's not the C Realm anymore.
No, it's not. In fact, it's the KMO Show. It rhymes with itself.
Nice.
Yeah, the description of the KMO Show on the homepage says, it's the C Realm podcast without the hyphen.
Right, okay. Or the C Realm. Well, yeah, I mean, I listened to your Zero podcast where you started to explain why you changed the name. And it makes sense to me. You're really bad. For a while, you were seemingly podcasting a little less, and now you're podcasting more again. Is that right?
Yeah. I have not been doing many free podcasts. I did like 20 episodes of the Padverb podcast last year, for which I was, you know, it's like when you were at Zero Books, I submitted an invoice for my work and I get paid. And I probably shouldn't say a whole lot as to why that isn't going on anymore, other than to say it didn't have a whole lot to do with me. It's, you know, internal stuff at that company. New show, the KMO Show. What's the point? Well, the point is the C-Realm website. Oh my goodness. Built by many hands over many years. I don't understand it. And whenever something breaks, I have to pay somebody to fix it. Like the analytics haven't worked in years. I don't know how many people. You know, if I put a show up on that RSS feed, I don't know how many times it gets accessed.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So just streamlining everything. Because, you know, that site was built bespoke by many hands over many years to essentially, not effectively, definitely not effectively, to do what many a free platform does today, you know, but with far more bells and whistles and intermediate steps. So I still use it for the vault, but yeah, it's certainly not built to grow. That's for sure.
Right. Well, I don't know. These days I'm pretty discouraged about growing with the content I do online because of the revelations from the Twitter files.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm paranoid. I don't know. You know what? I'm not paranoid. I just don't know for a fact that this has happened. But it seems to me somewhat likely that a Marxist podcast and YouTube channel and publishing effort would be algorithmically suppressed. Get on one of those lists.
Yeah. See, that is a dark road that I don't go down, because I could easily, take up that battle cry. It's like, I've been doing this for 17 years, God damn it. How come I don't have more of an audience? And
well, I mean, there was a time on the other YouTube channel where we were getting tens of thousands of views per video. It wouldn't be beyond the possible for us to get 100,000 views, 500,000 views a couple times. And now we're struggling to get to 10. And if we get 4 to 5, we feel like we've done well. And I don't think it's just because I moved to a new YouTube, channel and started again. That's part of it. But it's also, I don't know. I think there's a variety of reasons why. The death of the Bernie Sanders campaign and the kind of the death of the left that came along with it has reduced the amount of interest that people have in the topic altogether. But also I do think that there has been, especially coming up through the pandemic, an attempt to suppress alternative voices that is more pronounced and severe and far-reaching than it had been before.
So, yeah, that's something that I think comes out of the Twitter files, is that prior to the release of the documents, people were just going on, impressions and instinct and intuition, and it seemed as though it was mostly right-wing voices being censored, or maybe not censored exactly, but downgraded. What's the terminology for?
I would say they were being censored. They were just being censored behind their back. It's shadow banning. It's like, you will not get views. I mean, that's censorship. I don't think that we should pussyfoot around it. These voices were censored. And by the state, not by Twitter, by the FBI and the DHS and a whole bunch of other alphabet.
I won't bite on the is it censorship or not if it's a private platform. As you say, the government was definitely making its wishes known, or parts of the government, we should say, as it's certainly not a unified entity. But my question, or my thought that I had started was, before the Twitter files, it was just assumed that it was right-wing voices being censored or repressed, and now it's there are critiques of the left coming from the left, and it is the mainstream left that is being protected on, the corporate media, and now the big tech corporate, social media platforms. And it turns out, there's all kinds of voices that are being suppressed. It's
the state bureaucracy that's being protected, and that might look left-wing sometimes from some points of view, but it's not what I think of as the radical left, which basically liquidated itself into the Democratic Party around 2017, but which is very unfortunate, so it makes it very difficult to distinguish now. But Truth Out was suppressed. The World Socialist Organization was suppressed. And a whole lot of right-wing voices too, but to think of it as right and left is kind of wrong, because like people who are,
you sound like me now.
Like you just the people who would step forward and say, well, if you've had COVID, maybe you don't need a booster, or people would step forward and say, young people, I don't know if they really need to be vaccinated. Certainly not first. They would be suppressed, and despite their credentials and the reasonableness of their arguments, there's something called malinformation that was being put forward. So like if it was
disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation.
Malinformation is true information that might lead people to do the wrong things.
Oh, yes. That's definitely a concept we've been missing. Sure.
So even though it's true, don't report it and take it down and suppress it.
See, that's why my podcasting efforts have failed, because I've been trying to navigate the world without the concept of malinformation in my head.
You need to know about malinformation.
How could I possibly?
And this just came out from the Twitter
right.
post. I'm on a tear right now. Like I'm going on to like the YouTube channel for the Majority Report and leaving comments like Sam Cedar is a liar, and this is disgusting. This is a show I've been on. You know, these are my buddies. They're not exactly my buddies, but these are people who I would hope to court so I could get the portion of their audience. And I'm just like, fuck this. These people suck. And
so I just want to remind you, this is for a free, publicly available podcast. Okay. We're not in the vault right now.
I don't care anymore. KMO. So I'll say it right out in public. The Majority Report is carrying water for the Democrats who are carrying water for the FBI, and it's disgusting. That's what I'll say. And I know Matt Leck. I've interviewed Matt Leck, and he should know better than this, but he doesn't. So it's not insincere. It's not in bad faith. He just cares more about whether or not Matt Taibbi sounds like a friend, somebody he'd want to go to a party with in Brooklyn. Then he cares about whether or not Matt Taibbi is telling the truth. So,
for any listeners who might not be familiar with my usual production style, I had a free podcast called The C-Realm, C-Realm, and then I had a behind the paywall podcast called The C-Realm Vault. And for the last few years, I've mostly only talked to Doug for the Vault because it had a small audience and, it couldn't really go viral and he could say things there that he wouldn't say publicly.
Right. Yeah.
But that caution is just gone. It's like,
that's right. Yeah, that's right. But so people might not even know who I am. Should we introduce who I am at this point? Now that I've burned, down whatever bridges might have
Sure.
existed.
Whatever you think is relevant.
Okay, so I'm Doug Lane. I used to run the Zero Books imprint, which is a British critical theory imprint. I left there. The people who had run it before I started running it bought the company and got rid of me. So I started my own company called Sublation Media. I publish books. I create a podcast. I'm on YouTube. I've written novels, and you should go and read them. They're brilliant. And that's me. I'm Doug Lane, internet micro niche celebrity.
So the novels have been mostly, I would say, dry humor science fiction.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're kind of sometimes, they're sad too, but but yeah, they're kind of they're sardonic or satirical science fiction novels. The last one that came out was in 2018. It was called Bash Bash Revolution, and it was sort of my answer to Ready Player One, where the AI took over the world, and it was before the metaverse, just before the metaverse became a thing. And I was like, what if an AI took over the world, and what its first move was to get all the people in the world to leave reality and enter augmented reality so that it can control everyone directly. And that was the plot of Bash Bash Revolution. And it was a dystopian novel, but the characters in it believed they were saving the world by helping the AI to achieve this task. And they might have been in the novel universe. That's the last one I wrote. And yeah, so it's sort of satire, kind of. But who knows? Maybe next week it will all come true if Zuckerberg has his way and we all live in the metaverse.
So we all live in our personally curated metaverses already. It's just we're not wearing, full dive VR goggles and whatnot.
Yeah. So
for me, like the sun in the sky right now is Silicon Valley Bank, which, over the course of like 24 hours went from solvent to not solvent. Are you familiar with this story?
No, tell me what's going on with the Silicon Valley Bank. Which bank is it?
It is called Silicon Valley Bank.
Oh, Silicon Valley Bank. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And lots of startups, Silicon Valley startups, their venture capital funding is parked in that bank. And so a lot of them haven't been able to make payroll this week. Oh. And, there's the two big stable coins in the world of crypto are Tether, or USDT, and Circle has one called USDC. And Tether has always been super sketchy. Like they seem to print it out of nowhere. And when you ask, what's it backed by, they throw up kind of a hand wavy, lots of commercial paper, lots of corporate debt instruments are, behind our token. And it's super sketchy. Everybody realizes that there's no way there's nearly enough assets behind it to really give $1 value to each Tether. But USDC seemed like it was really legit, because for every dollar, $1 stable coin that they minted, they had $1, one actual US dollar in a bank account someplace. But a lot of those dollars were in the Bank of Silicon Valley, which just went belly up. So
no.
Now, the responsible, the stable, like the genuine stable coin, the one that actually had assets backing it, is the one it's lost its dollar peg. So it is a crazy time in crypto and in tech right now in terms of finance.
Does the government have a responsibility to bail out Silicon Valley, or to reimburse it's a commercial bank, so maybe not, right?
Well, it's the same as any other bank in that depositors' first $250,000 are, guaranteed by the federal government. But for a startup, with Silicon Valley or with VC money to spend or, to have in the bank, what's $250,000?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's bad news. Well, what do you think the cause of the collapse of crypto and now the Silicon Valley Bank is? What do you think? What went wrong there?
Well, we're still reeling from the whole FTX collapse. Whole Sam Bankman-Fried basically taking people's investment money and using it to buy influence, to give to politicians to try to get his industry regulated via a weaker federal agency than the FTC. So, yeah,
I think it's just the interest rates went up. I think like all of this speculative investment, including crypto, and a whole bunch of other things, were riding on low interest rates, super low interest rates, and when that went up, all that free money went away. And everything that was relying on that started to collapse. Could be streaming video services and big media companies are going to see problems as well, because they just seem like the whole tech internet media structure is really just running on fictitious capital, just a bunch of loans at very low interest rates, and now that's going away. But that's very sketchy, surface level.
Well, when the government was just giving money to people, just sending checks out, Bitcoin went from around $20,000 up to around $65,000. And then, that free money went away and it crashed back down to below 20,000. And then just before all this, it was up to around 23, and now it's back down to 20. So it's basically back where it was before the pandemic and the attempts to, keep people solvent by just sending checks out to people. But there's a lot more going on. I mean, the Bitcoin and Ethereum and the other big cryptocurrencies, they tend to go up and down with the tech stocks. So if your only economic indicator that you have access to is the price of Bitcoin, you can pretty much track the NASDAQ, just from the price of Bitcoin. Unless something that is utterly unique to crypto happens. But there's almost nothing that's utterly unique to crypto. It really just does rise and fall with the tech stocks. So even if there is something that is unique to crypto that drives down the price of Bitcoin, it's probably going to drive down the NASDAQ as well, all the top players.
Yeah. It's just that whole realm of crypto is something I kind of stayed away from because of my orthodox Marxism.
How do they clash?
Well, the crypto dream, sort of like the old California tech dream, which was that if we could create an alternative currency, we could liberate ourselves from the authoritarian structures of society. And the idea was that control over the currency is control over commerce, and independent currency means independence from the society as it is. In a way, you can break free of big corporations, break free of the federal government, and form alternative economies. And the Marxist view of currency is that it's not at the center of our economic reality, but rather, the way in which we produce commodities is what sets up the entire economy, and the currencies are just sort of a reflection of what happens to currencies, is a reflection of what's happening at one level down, at the level of production. So I didn't have a lot of confidence that this crypto scheme was going to be a politically liberatory. Now, the other side of that is I also wasn't someone who was looking to invest just to get rich. I mean, if I had, if I was thinking like an investor, I might have been interested in crypto for a while because I was like, oh, well, it's going up. I could have treated it like any other speculative investment. And in which case it might have been a good idea for a short while, just like any stock might be. But it wasn't sold that way. It was sold as like, this is going to create these grand social results. We're going to have a better society. We're going to be free. This is revolutionary. And as soon as you start talking that way, you're like, hey, you're stepping on my brand. Don't.
I'm the one peddling the revolution, buddy, and it's not that revolution.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah, well, I mostly look at it as a speculative asset. I'm not. One of the ideological underpinnings of crypto in general is that it allows for trustless interactions between people because the code is law. It is executed the only way it can be, and it's supposedly written in such a way as to foil criminal intentions, which is obviously not true. And I don't think that eliminating trust between people is a worthwhile goal. I don't think that it is our trust in one another which is holding us back. So yeah, I'm not interested in that at all. And in fact, most people who invest in Bitcoin and Ethereum and Cardano and, all the others do so through centralized exchanges like Coinbase. Very few people who hold Bitcoin are holding them offline in a cold wallet somewhere, to weather the storms that are going to take down the big institutions. Most people just treat it like a stock, and instead of going to, I use Webull to, follow stocks, but instead of going to Webull, you go to Coinbase or you go to Kraken or, KuCoin or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's very little that I'm interested in ideologically other than just the concept of sound money. Bitcoin cannot be inflated into worthlessness. It just can't. Mm-hmm. Whereas any fiat currency can be. And most, eventually will be.
Yeah.
Either quickly or just, very slowly over time, through what seems like quite mild inflation. The value of your money goes to basically zero over the course of a century. But, you'll be dead by then, so what do you care?
Well, I want to change the topic because I'm out of my depth there.
Okay.
But you and I have been podcasting for roughly the same amount of time. You've been around doing it longer than I have, but now we've both been doing it for so long that the difference in our tenure here is not remarkable.
A couple years difference makes a big deal in junior high, not so much at your 40th anniversary.
Exactly right. So yeah, I remember you were the old hand when I started, but not so much now. But we both are. Do you feel like you're at a point now you can look back on the podcasting you've done and say, oh yeah, this is developed. I've accomplished things I wanted to accomplish. I've seen the conversation. We used to talk about the conversation a lot, like in the early days, it'd be like, oh yeah, we're podcasting. We're part of a larger community. We're having a conversation with lots of other podcasters. Do you feel like that's gone away now, or do you feel
that's
like that's
definitely gone away? Yeah.
Yeah.
When I got started, I was not an official member of the Dopecast podcasting network, but I was regularly talking with those people on and off of podcasts, and the C Realm definitely came up at the same time as a lot of other podcasters that I was talking to. And now I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, and a lot of the ones I listen to they're big. It's just a parasocial thing for me, like, listening to Joe Rogan or something. I entertain no fantasies that I'm going to be a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast or that he's going to be on my show. That's probably a bad example, because I almost never listen to an entire episode of his podcast, but, there's a lot of podcasts that I'll check in with from time to time, but I am mostly going on guests and topics now rather than, having one source that I'm just following all the time, because it's built credibility with me through, a long period of, really high quality content.
The only podcast I listen to every week now, I watch on YouTube, but it's a podcast as well, and it's called, the Non-Zero podcast. It used to be called Blogging Heads TV.
So that's Robert Wright?
Robert Wright and Mickey Kaus.
Yeah, I read the book, Non-Zero, in the 90s, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a foundational text for me.
Yeah. Well, I have not read the book, and I don't know that if I would be honest if I was saying I watch them and listen to them because I agree with anything they say. In fact, I generally don't have the same politics of either of them or the same perspective on almost anything. Like they'll give a movie review, and I'm almost always completely opposed to their judgment. But I just find them to be somehow reputable as people, as that parasocial thing. And it also makes me a little worried. It's like, oh yeah, I have the Old White Guy podcast that I really like, 10 years, 15, 20 years older than I am. And
I've heard you speak to Robert Wright, so I know it's not completely parasocial.
No, I have. I've interviewed him. I interviewed him, Norman Finkelstein and Robert Wright were on my podcast to discuss Norman's book and the question of censorship recently. But and I've interviewed Mickey Kaus too. So it's not completely parasocial, but they don't. I don't think they listen to my podcast on any regular basis. But that's it. So I would, but all I'm really saying is if I had gone to myself in 2009 when I started podcasting and said, hey, if I go back in time and say, hey, Doug, within, what has it been? How long has it been? Like 15 years, something like that. You're going to be just really digging centrist podcasts from a couple of old New Republic editors and completely disengaged from everything here involved now because you're going to be old. I would have been upset.
No way, man. Yeah.
So do you think it's just a matter of us aging into this sort of complacency, or is the milieu changed?
The milieu has definitely changed. I mean, we are getting old. There's no denying that, but it's not worth talking about.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But yeah, as you say, when I first started, my show was definitely part of a family of shows, and it's definitely not anymore. And I was interviewing. I would pass guests around with my peers. In fact, some of our fallout has been when you would interview C-Realm podcast guests and then, want to talk about Marxism when they have nothing to say about the topic. Right.
Dmitry Orlov and Howard Kunstler are the two that I thoroughly alienated with my questions. And I was green, too. I wouldn't have handled it the same way today as I did then.
Sure.
But on the other hand, they were both assholes about it, I think.
Well, I'm the ultimate softball interview if I like somebody's book and I just get them on, I just, set them up to say what I know they already have to say. And I'm not looking to, catch them in contradictions or find some flaw in their worldview. It's, the worldview has already passed muster. Now I'm just saying, here, articulate it. Let me help you.
Right.
And so if they've gone from that to, the exact opposite of, hey, I disagree with your worldview, and here I've been thinking about things to say to, highlight why your worldview is wrong, then.
Yeah, but I was pretty soft still. Like, I wasn't like yelling at them, and I would only ask it once or maybe twice and then move on. I mean, I think I refined an approach to interviews where when I disagree with someone, I am polite enough and nice enough to sometimes get people to actually pause. Anyway, so yeah, I've tried to do that, and yeah, and I've also moved into mostly interviewing people who are a little closer to being within my own worldview, so that we'll be disagreeing about finer details, and that can actually be even more combative and cause.
Oh yeah, because then you're caught up in the narcissism of small differences, which is
right.
Always petty.
Yeah, always petty. But you know who I enjoyed interviewing a lot was Mickey Kaus, who is a Trump supporter. Voted for Trump twice. Supported welfare reform in the 90s. Friends with Ann Coulter. Talks to her regularly. And a former Marxist. Came out of the SDS, Students for Democratic Society. And that was really an interesting conversation. I wasn't combative with him. And he wasn't combative with me either. He wasn't trying to defend anything. But it was really interesting just to see how he thought he had not changed at all, was still completely on the left. And yet, is now a Trump supporting, welfare reform supporting Republican, really. So that was fascinating.
So,
sorry, I'm giving you dead ends.
No, it's not a dead end. I definitely have something to say on this. I'm just looking for an entry point. You used to tell me that the whole peak oil mentality was a right-wing mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And I have since seen the destruction of the peak oil community, and it broke up before the more recent, cultural divide.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who were the prominent figures in that community have definitely polarized, many of them going far left and many of them going far right. And many of them just, shutting up and withdrawing from public life.
Mm.
But it's bizarre. Like I went to the ASPO, the Association for the Study of Peak Oil and Gas conference in Washington, D.C. in 2011. You couldn't get that group of people together in one auditorium again because they would be at each other's throats. Can
you give me a couple of examples?
Sure. I mean, Jim Kunstler, who when I knew him, I still know him, but when I was interviewing him regularly for the C-Realm podcast, some of his regular talking points were that, he's a registered Democrat and that he's allergic to conspiracy theory. So he had no interest whatsoever in talking about 9/11 as anything other than a terrorist attack.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's throwing red meat to the QAnon people. Now he's broken far right, definitely a Trump supporter. As far as I can see, he is the victim, in quotation marks, of audience capture. He's found an audience among people who want to hear about how the election was stolen and, how the pandemic. I can't claim to speak to his fully fleshed out view on the pandemic. It just seems to be, the red tribe side of that disagreement that he's articulating now. Dmitry Orlov, oh my goodness. He's a full-on Putin apologist now. He's moved to Russia. And he's no longer on Substack or any of the places that I used to follow him because his funding had been cut off. Like, he'd lost access to the bank accounts that all of those social media, platforms were paying into. So he's had to completely, reinvent himself, on the far, far right, like the, Putin did nothing wrong right.
Yeah, like the right of Russia in Russia, not the U.S. right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, okay. And then what about somebody who went left?
So I think most of the people who went left, people like, what's his name? Post Carbon Institute, Richard Heinberg, definitely a big, voice in the peak oil, the narrative. And he hasn't changed. He's one of the only peak oil people that I, ever hear from who is still on that message of, collapse is coming because of resource constraints. Most everybody else has moved on to just culture war stuff because I guess that's what gets the clicks. But, he had a very buttoned down sort of presentation with the Post Carbon Institute, and he's stayed in that lane, and he owns it now. There's no competition for it. But he sent out something during the Trump years, which basically made me just unsubscribe from his newsletter. It was just Trump is evil, Nazi, Nazi, Nazi. I was like, ugh, come on.
Okay, yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, the reason I originally said I don't know about why some people went to the left and went to the right, and it doesn't sound. I don't have a good grip on the person you just described as being on the left, except that they were still liberal progressive.
Yeah, but he's not Marxist left. He's just I hate Trump left.
Right, which is that's a pretty broad swath of people. But what I would say about why the reason I thought the peak oil ideology was right wing was because I thought it was anti-modern. It was anti-technology, anti-progress, sometimes even opposed to the idea of human development and freedom. It just didn't seem to be convinced that we could overcome obstacles and find new ways to live in the natural world, that there was a limit to that. And I thought that was kind of conservative and Malthusian at times. And I still do, but I don't actually have the expertise to be able to say definitively, solar will get us beyond, fossil fuels, or fusion energy will do the trick, or, I don't know what the answer is there, but I just do think we have to operate on the principle of trying to be free of artificial constraints, social constraints that are historically developed, as we investigate how we can live together more fully in the world. And I think that would include something like turning to nuclear energy when needed, and trying to be sane about our the way we use resources, but also to develop new forms of resource allocation. My dream is a Dyson sphere around the sun, and that kind of thing. I'm all for ever onward with our control of and use of the natural world.
Well, one of the participants in the first episode of this podcast, not the one you listened to, not the solo show, but it was a trialogue, was saying that he was quoting his brother, who is a translator, who said that which makes our world look more like Star Trek is progress. And that which takes us away from Star Trek is, the opposite of progress.
Yeah, I mean, with some limits on that. I mean, with the more styrofoam rocks strewn about will not be progress, all right? And it might look like Star Trek, but no. But yeah, I get what he means, really. Yes, I agree.
People motivated by a desire to explore or better themselves or better their society, and they're not worried about money.
Right.
And not interested in acquiring it.
Right. They're not so worried about their own they're not basing what they choose to do on personal acquisition as a way to guarantee survival. That's already taken care of.
Cue Deanna Troi talking to Mark Twain in the turbo lift.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So let me go back to peak oil for a sec, because when you were telling me peak oil's a right-wing project back in 2008, 2009, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, nuh-uh, man, because I bought into the notion that right-wing just equals bad. And, this thing that I'm interested in can't be right-wing because that would imply that it's bad, and it can't be bad because I'm interested in it. Mm-hmm. But now that I'm, very far from those days and I'm looking back at them, I can see, well, there is definitely peak oil created this big tent that had people from the right and the left very comfortably mingling underneath it because it was anti-technology. And you've got a lot of people on the environmental left who are just reflexively anti-tech.
Right.
And you've got a lot of people on the environmentalist left who are misanthropic. They say humanity is a plague, humanity is a disease, we need to go away so that the rest of the life on Earth can thrive without us, which I absolutely repudiate and will have no part of that.
Right. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah.
Right. So, but you had people like that who were attracted to peak oil because the peak oil narrative is collapse is coming. There's nothing we can do about it except to reorganize at a lower energy throughput level, more locally, more human, more face-to-face human interaction. That will be the future that we are all thrust into, whether we like it or not. And that was attractive to people on the left who hated humanity, and it was attractive to people on the right who hate the way that industrial society kind of neuters us all and renders a lot of what used to be a valuable part of ourselves kind of useless. Mm-hmm. Our ability to organize among people in the real world and to, distribute responsibilities and duties and rewards while looking at somebody in the eye and not doing so through some large hierarchy that separates the people, making the decisions that bring pain from the people who experience the pain.
Right.
Yeah. So, the imminent collapse narrative definitely had something for both the left and the right. Mm-hmm. But come the cultural, polarization that we've experienced over the last 6 or 7 years, that structure couldn't have held, but it fell apart on its own even before that happened. Mm-hmm. But maybe not. I mean, I remember going to Zuccotti Park in 2011 on the same trip that I went to DC for the ASPO conference. Mm-hmm. And I remember the human microphone or the megaphone. One person would talk and everybody else would chant. And I also remember the progressive stack, which said, okay, if you're white, if you're male, if you're over a certain age, your contribution to this conversation is going at the bottom of the stack. And if you are a person of color or if you are somehow, a protected minority, then your contribution will rise to the top and we'll address it first. And I remember being turned off by that at the time, even though I was profoundly in support of what I took the message to be. We need to focus on the benefit of the 99% over the 1%. Mm-hmm. But, looking back on it, the writing on the wall was there, for the dysfunction of that sort of, protest. The fact that it really didn't have any defined aims or any victory conditions, but it definitely had some strong opinions about who got to say what. Looking back on that, I definitely should have seen that for what it was, and it took me a while.
Yeah, well, this idea of like the progressive stack or the approach to identity politics that has been so divisive in the last, let's say decade, but certainly since 2016, that has been around on the left for quite a while. And it's not as though it wasn't a difficulty before this latest round of the culture war. It was
more contained, though. It was niche. But Kaczynski was definitely describing it in great detail in his manifesto in the 90s.
Right. And it helped to break up organizations in the 70s on the left. Distrust between white people and black people was instrumental and used by the COINTELPRO, FBI, to destroy the Black Panthers. And that's a kind of rough sketch of what happened. But what I would say is different now is that the Democratic Party, after Trump particularly, found it useful to go full radical, radlib woke, and mainstream the excesses of the new left and which is the 60s, left, and to take up what had been kind of fringe opinions within the academy, dumb them down and push them out. And it was just all in service of busting up the Trump coalition and the Sanders movement at the same time. But it was only one thing that was going on. It wasn't the primary aim of the Democratic Party at that time, and there was debates within the Democratic Party about how useful that approach was really going to ultimately be. But it was a strategy that was used, and it was the other thing was it was monetizable. It was popular enough to get clicks. It was inflammatory enough to get clicks. People would hate click on it. They would click on it because they felt affirmed by it. BuzzFeed created a model based on being hyper woke. It was a meme. It was a worldview that got legs for a variety of reasons in the last decade. And now people are still making money off of this approach. I think the woke side actually is backing off, but it still exists to some degree and comes up from time to time. The Scott Adams cancellation might be the most recent iteration of the woke political brigade. But it has a different character. I mean, like the Scott Adams cancellation is a cancellation over something that he said that very few people would say was anything other than stupid at the very least and racist at the very worst. And yet, for me, the problem with Scott Adams, with the cancellation of Scott Adams, is not that I care that much about what he actually said, but that this idea that people should just be forced out of public life for saying the wrong thing has been mainstreamed, I think, on the left and the right. I think that to a large degree, we don't question, what we think the consequences should be for wrongthink anymore. And that's something that's come along. Yeah, it's been expressed through woke politics, but it's sort of, even in my lifetime, it started before that. I don't know. I'm going to go back to the Twitter files, and maybe I'm sort of just free associating here. But do you remember when Bush created the Office of Total Information Awareness?
Yes, I do. So the one you're talking about, they had the eye and the pyramid in their.
Jesus, I'm getting old. I've clearly got the dementia. Okay, so the point is that the younger of the two Bush boys, not Jeb. Let's leave Jeb out of this. It was George W. Bush. He created the Office of Total Information Awareness right after 9/11, and the goal of that organization, that institution, was to be able to capture and record and be able to sort through all information online, all communication, all over the world. Give the security apparatus access to everything, all of our phone calls, all of our emails, all of our DMs, I don't know, all of our MySpace pages, whatever it was around. They wanted to be able to record it, keep it in an archive, access it. And people didn't like that. And it faced a lot of pushback and protest and critical responses. And so they changed the logo, renamed the organization, and didn't talk about it. And then, but it kept going. And Edward Snowden, years later, would come forward and reveal that, yeah, in fact, total information awareness happened. They are surveilling all of our emails, or they're keeping track of all of our phone calls. They have them all recorded. They could go through them all anytime they want. It's a big effort. They weren't going to just do it at random, but it's all there. And now, with the Twitter files, we're being told that not only does the Secret Service or the security apparatus, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, DHS, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of other parts of this machine beast that I don't even remember the names of. They're all actually involved in deciding not only like recording and watching what we say, but determining what is acceptable to say and who can be heard and what the conversation can be. They're recording the conversation and they're controlling the conversation. And that effort of control and authoritarianism is served by woke politics, but it's also served by evangelical Christianity at times. It's also served by neoliberal neocon ideology. Whatever happens to be useful in a given moment will be the ideology that's picked up by the bureaucracy, which only has one real aim, which is to maintain its power and control. And so I think that people who the big divide right now is between people who will be able to talk to the larger picture, the authoritarian direction in which society is going, not just in the United States, but around the world, and try to oppose it. And those who will get caught up in trying to figure out which side of that battle of control they want to pick. Like, would they rather have Democratic Party overlords, or Republican overlords? And I know this is, I sound like I'm not saying anything new here. This has been something I might have said in 2009, but I just believe it to be accurate. It doesn't seem like a pose anymore. It's like, yeah, it's clear. There are attempts being made to control the population and limit what we can think, limit what we can say, limit what we can do, stop us from being able to organize politically. And, we're being asked to participate in our own domination by choosing between woke or anti-woke politicians. It's just kind of sad, really.
That was Doug Lane. So I should mention that while I'm releasing this on Wednesday, we recorded this conversation on Sunday. And the Silicon Valley Bank story and the federal government's amazing response to it, and not necessarily amazing in a good way, that has all unfolded considerably since, the conversation that I recorded here with Doug. But one thing that he really did get right off the bat, even without knowing much about the story, is that it is rising interest rates that you can't say that the Bank of Silicon Valley was super reckless in its investing. They bought government bonds. They just bought long-term government debt. Pretty boring, pretty stable sort of investment, but it was a long-term investment. And you never can predict when all your customers are going to panic and try to take their money out of the bank all at once. That's a bank run. Under normal conditions, a bank only needs a tiny fraction of its actual deposits on hand to give out to customers because, for the most part, customers are taking money out at a very predictable rate, and they're usually not coming in and asking for everything. Not to, be an apologist for the particular bank executives here. Obviously, in search of returns, they did tie up customer funds in long-term investments that just, could not be made liquid to give to customers. And if you put your money in the bank, it is understood that when you come to the bank and say, I want my money, they have to give it to you. It's kind of what a bank is, right? So anyway, that part of the conversation got a little bit confused because Doug asked me a question about both banking and crypto. And in this case, particularly the Silicon Valley case, they're not really connected. It's not one topic that can be covered with one explanation. And speaking of crypto, I mentioned that I'm not really on the ideological side of crypto. I do have high hopes for some things. Like, when you think of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, you probably think of pictures of apes, cartoon apes that get sold for a bunch of money. But there are other uses for NFTs, particularly when tokenizing real-world assets and then dividing up either ownership or control of those assets so that you can run, say, a business or a shared investment of some sort, like real estate. And these types of organizations, which can be governed in this way, are known as DAOs, or distributed autonomous organizations. And I think that they do hold great promise for coordinating human action, which really, that's what government is. But, we don't leave everything to the government. We distribute power to various power centers, and using NFTs to tokenize real-world assets and then to create a system by which the management of those assets is decided by groups of people using their NFTs to vote, that seems like one promising use of the technology. Now, I say I'm not ideological about crypto for the most part. I'm certainly not among the group of people who think that crypto is going to eventually overthrow fiat currencies, particularly of big governments like that of the United States. I don't really see that happening. I don't know that it would be a good thing if it did happen. But having an alternative system, one that is not subject to inflation, and by inflation I don't mean, consumer prices rising, I mean the amount of money in circulation increasing dramatically. Inflation of the money supply. I think having alternatives to fiat currencies, particularly with sound money aspects, is probably a good thing. But I'm not a convert. I'm not a fanatic. If you have a different point of view on that topic, I'm happy to hear it out. With the old C-Realm podcast, each episode had a title. And I decided not to do that with these new episodes, simply because it's just one more thing. It's one more item on the podcast checklist, and it's not strictly necessary. And what's more, I always chose the title last, and a lot of times it was almost an afterthought. And people seem to think that I put a lot more into the titles really than I did, and they thought that maybe there was some messaging going on in the titles, and there might have been some, but again, it wasn't deeply thought out. And, if I don't pick titles, then I don't have to defend my choice of title. But if I were going to give this episode a title, it would probably be Aging into Complacency. And, that was a phrase that Doug used, and I wrote it down. That's typically how I picked titles in the past. I would just be listening for phrases, evocative phrases, and I would write them down while either in conversation with the guest or later on while editing the conversation. But talking about aging into complacency, my shift in outlook that I think that comes with age is that I'm just not, I am interested in the big picture, and I certainly am interested in the trajectory of human civilization going into the future, but I'm not certain about anything. I mean, the things that I'm certain about are they're small, they're personal, they're close to home. I certainly don't believe that the world would be a better place if everybody adopted my point of view. I think my point of view is curmudgeonly, and my point of view is it's just very personal these days. It is. I am focused on my life and the opportunities that I have left in my life to do things I've always wanted to do, or to, find some community, to find a place where I have people, right around me that I can interact with face to face in satisfying ways. I have a little bit of that here, but not much. Anyway, this rambling that I do at the end of podcasts, I do it with less self-consciousness on my Behind the Paywall show, the C-Realm Vault podcast, which I'm open to renaming that podcast, given that the C-Realm is not, the connection to the C-Realm is not obvious now that I've changed the name of the free show. So if you have any suggestions, I know Robert Wright would suggest Parrot Room, and Doug calls his Behind the Paywall show the Parrot Room, but I don't really get it. So if you have suggestions, let me know. How to communicate with me. Some of you know my email address. You're welcome to use it. I'm not giving it out anymore, though. I would suggest that if you want to post a comment, that you either find this episode on YouTube and post a comment there, or find the entry for it on my Patreon page. It's patreon.com/KMO. And the listings for these free shows will always be free. You're welcome to go there. You don't have to support me on Patreon in order to post comments or interact with me or with the other listeners on Patreon. But this conversation with Doug Lane is really just getting rolling at the point where I left it off here in this episode. There's another 20 minutes worth of conversation, which will be in the C-Realm Vault podcast. It will be episode number 450 of the C-Realm Vault podcast, which you can get on my Patreon page. And in that, we talk a lot about the war in Ukraine. As I mentioned to Doug, I don't have strong opinions on that, but, if you're Red Tribe or Blue Tribe, you share the opinions of your tribe, which of course are polarized, antithetical to one another, and infused with hostility and disgust for the other side. So right now, in the first quarter of 2023, if you're a good Blue Tribe member, then you are in favor of spending whatever it takes to aid the Ukrainian freedom fighters in their righteous battle against the evil invader. Not saying that's wrong, even though my tone of voice there is somewhat mocking. I just, it's a viewpoint, but it's one that I'm not invested in. And then I think, I don't follow the Red Tribe quite as closely as I do the Blue, but I think the Red Tribe position is, we've had enough of war. Putin didn't attack us. Ukraine is not an allied state. Why are we throwing so much of our own just treasure in this instance. It's not blood and treasure like we usually do. Why are we throwing so much treasure at Ukraine when we have needs here at home that are going unmet? If I've got either of those positions wrong, if you are a member in good standing of either the mainstream blue tribe or the mainstream red tribe, and you want to tell me what I got wrong, well, I welcome your input. Because, again, these are just impressions that I have formed from my cursory interactions with the mainstream media and the mainstream alternative media. On the topic of peak oil, as often happens, Doug asked me a question, and the answer that I came up with was, it was okay. But, of course, in the editing and listening to the conversation a second time, I came up with a better example of how the polarization of mainstream culture has broken up what used to be harmonious factions within the peak oil community. And one excellent example, and if my voice sounds a little different here, I'm re-recording this bit because I'm not looking to make any enemies here, and I'm going to be as diplomatic as I can be. But the Automatic Earth website, a blog that I associated with peak oil back when I was part of that community, was written by two authors. Nicole Foss, otherwise known as Stonelay, or she wrote under the pen name Stonelay, and her partner in blogging, Raoul, I think his last name is Major, but he published and still publishes on the Automatic Earth under the name Ilargi. Well, the last time I spoke to Nicole Foss, she told me that she had basically cut off all ties with Ilargi because he had gone full Trump MAGA. And, she went the other way. And I don't know. I haven't spoken to either one about this, but I could imagine that each of them would say that they didn't really change fundamentally, but that their partner in blogging went nuts, at the beginning of the Trump years. I don't have a dog in that fight. I'll say no more about it. Point being, these are two people with rather different viewpoints who are polarized now, who will not work together now, who previously ran a blog together. But Doug's position, which I guess is a fairly mainstream Marxist position, if mainstream Marxist is not a contradiction in terms, that technology is quite powerful and, the things that seem to be impediments to continued technological development and economic growth really aren't, and that human creativity and ingenuity will overcome those impediments. That happens. Look at history. It certainly happens. And, what also happens is that new innovations and new ways of doing things bring with them unanticipated consequences. And when I say unanticipated consequences, I'm not talking about benefits. So all of this, I file under the heading of life is complicated, the global system is extremely complex, and one known feature of complex systems is nonlinear behavior, unexpected outputs given the inputs. Weird stuff happens. Unexpected stuff happens. Stuff happens that causes us, if we're still adaptable and not curmudgeonly and rigid with, age, things happen which should cause us to re-examine our priors and to always maintain a certain level of humility when it comes to our certainness as to how right we are about what's actually happening in the world. I call it epistemological humility, but you could just call it knowing your limitations. Each of us is a human being with a limited scope, a limited vision of what's happening, and a limited ability to describe and much less predict what's going on and what will happen next. So, not that you're looking for advice, but my advice is stay curious, pay attention, but hold your opinions lightly. And forgive others whose opinions differ from yours. All right, that is all for this third regular installment of the new KMO Show. Thanks for listening. I will talk to you again in 1 week's time.